During the Fontaine Flood, the hilly churls are thrown into disarray, and so three choose to board the Astral Express and escape into space under the guise of a vacation. Hello, and welcome back to the Shade Chamber, the only podcast from space. Because the pause screen opens from the other side on this game, we're going to start the intros in a reverse order. So, Wander, why don't you go first?
I'm the trolley problem of Honkai Star Rail. Wander.
I'm the person who walked in on you and your spicy Jingyuan picks. Don't worry, I won't tell. Rad?
And my name is Break. I finally escaped to the one place uncorrupted by capitalism. Spice! I guess with that, we should just get into the usual disclaimer, right?
Mm-hmm. 100%.
Disclaimer! This is a gacha game. The gacha game model is predatory and designed to ping the part of your brain that casinos also target, which means don't play this game if you have an addictive personality or you don't have the money for it.
Yeah, that's kind of the rub of this. We're talking about yet another gacha game this time around, still developed by Hoyoverse, but kind of their first big sort of launch since Genshin. The reason we wanted to cover this game is because it is the first major Hoyoverse launch since Genshin. So, as of right now, they have 3 concurrently running live service games with Honkai Impact 3rd, Genshin Impact, and Honkai Star Rail. And, given that we're typically covering Genshin, this is kind of the first opportunity we've had to see a launch from the very beginning and kind of compare it to Genshin's initial launch and see sort of like what lessons the company has learned, what their takeaways were, and recording what we've been through on the first 6 or 7-ish months of the game at this point.
I forgot that it's only been 6 or 7 months.
Yeah, wow. Time is weird and made up.
Personally, I'm actually glad we waited this long because now we've also had the opportunity to sort of see what the PS5 launch of the game looks like. And that has actually changed my opinions on it a little bit. But we'll get into that. Yeah, this is kind of a new world. Back in the day, you would buy a video game, and then when a company wanted to make a sequel, a spin-off, something else that was kind of a brick and mortar packaged product, you'd see similarities between games that they had worked on. There'd usually be the opportunity to improve, graphic fidelity, see what ported from like a console experience to a PC experience to a handheld experience. Now in this era of kind of ongoing live service games, we're seeing a lot of blending. It's personally the first time I've seen such a successful content rollout across multiple platforms being maintained by the same single studio. All that to say, Genshin is still running. Fontaine 4.2 has just dropped. We still have Natlan, Shesnaya, Conria, maybe Celestia, maybe some other places afterward, maybe a Genshin Impact Chapter 2, Book 2, whatever you want to call it. Some kind of development for it in the future. But this game is just going to kind of coexist alongside it from here on out. And they're definitely sharing resources. They're definitely sharing assets. They're definitely sharing menus, animations, design sensibilities. It's still like comparing apples to oranges. There are still major differences between the two, how to engage with both of them.
They've added stuff into Star Rail that definitely got thrown into like various Genshin feedback surveys, like, hey, can you put this in the game? And then they did, but it was in Star Rail instead of actually Genshin. So there have been some jokes about how Genshin is perhaps public test realm for stuff they wanted to put into Star Rail.
Yeah, there's been a lot of that. I mean, there's a lot of sort of back and forth right now on which child is Hoyoverse's favorite child.
And the answer is whichever one will make them the most money.
Exactly. But I feel like this game was definitely a product of spillover from Genshin's success.
Yeah. Pretty sure that's where they got the budget for a good chunk of this.
I wonder how the assignments for this worked in terms of the internal communications. Like, was this for people who were burnt out on working on Genshin and were like, here's something a little easier?
It's entirely possible.
Yeah, that's a
Or maybe
really
it was like DreamWorks in the 90s where it's like you're underperforming on Genshin, you go to the Shrek place.
God. You go to the Shrek place.
instead of getting Shreked, it's getting star railed.
Exactly.
Oh no, getting railed of any kind is bad in this context. All right. Star Rail is like Genshin, but gutted of all of the real-time action combat. Instead, it's a turn-based RPG, something that's a little more typical of what you would see for a mobile launch. These types of games are a dime a dozen on mobile. Many have come, many have fallen. Granted, this still has that Hoyoverse groundswell behind it. Full voice acting, constant content updates, high fidelity 3D models. So much so that it actually merited a PS5 port. But yeah, I guess what's kind of been the experience with you guys on it so far?
From like an overall standpoint, the gameplay feels a lot more simplistic than Genshin. Obviously, it's turn-based. We're not having to deal with like the environment. We're not having to deal with elemental reactions or just large-scale exploration. Like there's still a small amount of exploration in the game, but it's all within these kind of self-contained little maps and areas. So we're not like climbing up buildings. We're not trying to figure out where the teleport waypoint is by like jumping down a pit. We know where everything is going in, and it's easier to kind of interact with the world that way. From a combat perspective, they have made it a lot simpler by not having to worry about the combinations of different elements, but by doing it this way, each character is able to have like their own abilities in the way that they interact with things. So there is a lot more complexity into how you build your teams.
There's the small perk of being able to run indefinitely in Star Rail because you no longer have to worry about a stamina bar,
Mm-hmm.
which is sort of like it's like you trade being able to jump and climb around your environment for, well, if I want to get somewhere quickly and it's a little bit of a distance from the nearest uh waypoint, I can just run there and I don't have to sort of account for my stamina when I do that.
The amount of space that you're physically traversing is much, much, much smaller than Genshin. Genshin has this, vast open world that has to be accounted for, like approaching problems in multiple directions. Star Rail is much more linear in its approach. The space station, Belabog, and Xianzhou are comprised of multiple dungeons. Belabog looks huge because the space you're kind of limited in is a lot of back alleys and sort of closed off streets. They can make the scale of it feel a lot larger because you're by definition not going to be traversing like every interior of every building you pass, or being able to, or have the ability to climb over the tops of them or anything like that.
They tuck away all these like weird little interactions and sort of like, not like, you can't really call it a quest chain because it's not even like a formal thing happening, but it's sort of like a series of events that happens like either over time or like through enough conversations with the right NPCs or what have you. Like there's a thing you get for like diving into enough trash bins.
Yeah. That's famous. I think the fandom thinks they invented the trash memes. They did not invent the trash memes. That was planted.
No, they did not. They didn't.
Yeah.
It was in the game to start with, but it is really funny.
Yeah. It's this big level of polish that we're generally used to, but on a scale that seems smaller and more curated.
They do a pretty good job of like when I was a kid and I was playing like old Pokemon like Blue, and you know how they, some of the pathways in certain places would have really obvious barriers to keep you from going off the side of the map because there was nothing past it. I feel like Star Rail has actually done a really interesting like job in that it bounds you in, but there's still the implication that there's more out there.
Religion plays a larger part in Star Rail than it does in Genshin. Individual societies will follow specific paths. The entirety of the IPC and Belabog that are directly in conflict with each other at a certain point are both followers of the preservation, and their approach to it is just completely at odds with one another. And similarly, you have like other people like the Xianzhou, where okay, here's an alliance of 3 different races that all decided to hop on this boat and fly through space and try to take out this other Aeon because it sort of like screwed them all over in a different way.
Xianzhou being I guess like dedicated to the hunt and also like opposed to the abundance, which is supposed to be the root of their immortality to begin with, is really interesting because it's literally just like um it's a reverse Xianxia because like character A is trying to cultivate to like immortality and ascend to godhood, etc. Right? And these people are like, yeah, we've seen immortality, it fucking sucks, take it away, we're purging it from this universe forever.
Yeah, just like healers, white mages, we hate them. Get them out of here.
Get that shit out of here.
It is such an interesting take on a archetype called the abundance, where it's like kind of just in our society, like an abundance of resources sounds great because it means that it can often be traded cheaply and fairly. And then here's the hunt just being like, no, you don't understand. Abundance means too much. We can't let them do this. We gotta stop letting them make people immortal because then they go crazy and turn into tree monsters.
Immortality means Dark Souls happens right here on our ship.
Immortality it leads to stagnation, etc., which is a really interesting sort of take on all that. The Aeons and just them being functionally gods, but also being like they feel a lot more abstract in a way, even if the Trailblazer might meet one or two. Like they're not like everyday occurrences. Genshin's gods sort of like end up like you end up traveling around with them because you fucking roll for them, etc. And then they lose a little bit of the mystique because
Well,
you
yeah,
see
yeah.
them all the time, and it's just like, yeah, here's I don't know, here's Raiden A who couldn't get therapy and so like caused problems in like 4 nations.
They're very human. They're very relatable. They're on the ground with you, hanging out, having their own problems and dealing with the world around them. Whereas like the Aeons, you have like Nanook, where it's like, okay, he embodies all destruction. So what's the first thing he's going to do upon laying eyes on you? Incinerate you immediately. Like that's crazy.
Yeah, he just kind of obliterates you.
That's wild.
And there are levels of separation between the Eons and just regular mortal kind too, because there's also their like champions that they create for themselves, and that's how they more directly interact with the universe at large.
Yeah, I really hope that we actually don't end up dealing with a constant cavalcade of Lord Ravagers, because I'm like, they're basically
we don't need
big
more Fatui Harbingers.
Well, like the Harbingers have more development. The Lord Ravagers are like, I'm a big evil space monster who wants to kill you. And it's like, okay.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
yeah.
their whole shtick is they like the destruction, and that's their whole thing. They're going to send the universe off into an orgy of destruction if that's the last goddamn thing they do.
It might be.
But I also like the fact that the Aeons, one, all have different origins. It's like just being an Aeon means you're a big, super powerful space thing, but it's not like they're all Gnosis holders or primordial dragons or anything like that. It's like, here's the satellite that became sapient after it loaded itself up with so many scientists that it just kind of like became a super space god. And here's the guy who likes to build big amber walls. And
oh yeah, the swarm who was wiped out because it was propagating so much over the entirety of space. The rest of the ends were like, hey, we can't let this guy keep going. This is going to be a problem.
yeah, Tazy-Ronth. Yeah, Tazy-Ronth. But yeah, Tazy-Ronth just being like, hey, do you know what is really good for the universe? Constant, unending Zerg rushes. And then all of the Aeons look at it and are just like, so yeah, we're gonna kill it, right? Like feuds are off. We're all going to kill this thing.
Put the other matters aside. We gotta get some interstellar bug spray. Gotta get this infestation out of here.
But just the fact that all of the Aeons are representative of a specific kind of mind state, as well as the game's generally speaking higher quality of writing, I feel like all of the Aeons really pulled a lot of inspiration from both the Disco Elysium inner voices as well as Hades' various gods, particularly because they all sort of slot into those roles both during the narratives and dialogues, but also during the game's roguelike sections. So, the Trailblazers, following the path of Trailblaze, which is to say, being space heroes, basically.
Or just space wanderers, really.
Yeah. Everyone has a nebulous destination that they're trying to reach, and during that time, they're going to go do a bunch of Star Trek like space adventures in space.
Well, it's very interesting that, like, kind of the first big region they come to, they try to frame it almost as like a space western, because that really is the vibe you get about like the Trailblazers path. Is like they're just kind of the lone gunman wandering. Like obviously they have, you know, March and the other nameless aboard the train, but like they're not like they're just kind of going around and like solving problems as they encounter them. They're not going to these locations with the intention of solving problems.
Yeah, that's the heroic setup for main characters to kind of be able to be thrown sort of into these settings with very little pre-reasoning.
Like they can both have the idea like, yeah, this is a hero who's saving all these people and all these planets, and still have the trash goblin line of, I don't have a job, I'm kind of a bum.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
trash goblin who was kind of just born yesterday and is still learning to human. Trailblazer wakes up, etc. is like, well, I guess I have to learn to person now because I didn't used to exist, but now I do.
Yeah, the Trailblazer is just great because they're one part Harry Dubois and the other part Yu Narukami, and that actually makes for a great silent protagonist. I feel like the Trailblazer just has a lot of personality to them. They don't really feel like a silent protagonist because everything they can say can either be heroic or insane or a dialogue option that is only appropriate to a raccoon that has somehow been reshaped into something that looks like a human being.
Exactly. Well, and it's interesting because the Trailblazer like wakes up and is like learning to human, but then is also getting asked questions about like youth culture. Like Welt literally will ask you like, "Hey, so can you help me change my avatar in my phone so that I can be a cool mech man?"
Yeah, that's that.
I
that
like
I
how they
love
make
that.
old man jokes about Welt so much. It's just like this guy is like he's not that old, but
Nah.
he's just functionally the party old like party uncle, party dad, something. I don't know.
He's the party dad via anime logic, where anyone over 30 is decrepit and old.
Yeah. But also just the fact that the Trailblazer has interesting dialogue options versus kind of what we're used to with the Traveler. It's nice to see a protagonist who is highly interesting even when they're not fully voiced, but also this is going to come up again very very soon for us on the channel, but it's really nice having a setting where you don't have a sidekick that is more or less constantly insulting you as the player's intelligence at all times nonstop.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm a much bigger fan of having characters like Marsh, Dan Hang, Welt, and Himeko around, just because one, you get different perspectives on things. Two, it feels a little more like a JRPG that is committed to developing its cast, but it also gives them more opportunity to split the party off and have so far just Dan Hang, but I'm sure they're going to do it with other characters, kind of have their own independent adventures once or twice. Like they're not completely everyone's on the same train, but they're not completely welded at the hip to you. And I think that's a good way to showcase characters.
Yeah, like it was kind of nice where when we first went to Belabog, we kind of came in with like, the kids of the group with like March and Don Hung, and then the Trailblazers, the party. And then when we went to the Xianzhou, they changed up the party a little bit and we're like, yeah, why don't you, Welt, and March have an adventure together? And like,
And similarly, Dan Hang is also having his own adventure concurrently where he's meeting different characters.
Hmm.
Yeah, like his deal is because it was relevant to his backstory, so like that made sense. But also, I'm just sort of wondering how they're gonna do that in the future, since we don't have any like Chekhov's loaded backgrounds left so far.
Well, we don't really know where March is from.
We did get a little bit of March's, the kind of direction March is going in, because she's somehow related to the Remembrance, and they finally tied her backstory in with that like velvet room attendant who's hanging out in the corner of the ship that nobody but you can remember is there.
Oh
Hmm.
right.
There's a big reason that March's memory was erased, because she is tied in directly with the Remembrance Aeon for one reason or another, and that's kind of the first major clue we've gotten on her. And I guess it's a little bit easier to do characters having independent adventures because the game's storyline is much more curated on that linear path. You're not going to get to Xianzhou bosses accidentally before seeing the narrative context in which they're introduced, which is kind of a double sided sword, because I think it helps the game's writing, but it does unfortunately magnify the Yai problem by like 100-fold.
Yeah, that does become a large issue where, like, if you are a new player just entering Belabog and you roll like Blade, well, hey, good luck. You're gonna have to play through all of Belabog and then most of the Xianzhou to get to his like Ascension Mat boss fight.
Yeah. Like there are some characters you just will not be able to level up if you're far away from the storyline zone in which they're introduced.
Mm.
So I feel like that's something they're going to have to revisit at some point, because it is going to rapidly turn into a problem.
I was just gonna say, depending on the character, like they're not totally story locked. So like you could, just run around most of the Xianzhou and get like some of the early characters mats together. It is a very specific set of characters, but I am curious to know what the resolution to that will be.
Pom Pom is the best mascot. The end. No, I will not be taking questions at this time.
You know what? Fair.
Yeah, Pom Pom's pretty great. I like that Pom Pom is also again, I've grown to like Paimon, because kind of learning to like Paimon is maybe the first challenge of Genshin, sort of the first make or
Hmm.
break challenge. So if you're playing the game a long time, I think you just sort of like inherently tolerate Paimon to the point of like kind of phasing her out a little bit in your head, I guess.
Yeah.
Uh Pom Pom is less intrusive than that.
I think it really does Pom Pom a good service to like not have them accompany you during the adventures. Like we don't need a little, baby mascot like telling us the obvious. Like
telling
we
us how telling us how the guy whose daughter died looks pretty upset.
He looks pretty
yeah,
sad.
Yeah.
like it it helps a lot like that they are just kind of a hub character. They're there to interact with when we want to and occasionally during the story, but like they are not always in our ear. And I think that kind of ties back into what we were talking about earlier, where it is nice to have this like canon set of companions who are following us around that we can have these characters interact with and bounce lines off of and like feel like they are a close knit community of characters, which they're supposed to be.
And I also like that they're not a monolith as a group either. I am a fan of the fact that they have different sort of opinions on the moral direction certain scenes and large scale decisions go in. Like particularly March not being hyper happy about the decision to kind of lie about what Cocolia was doing after Belabog. I thought that was interesting. It's not Baldur's Gate. It's not going to lead down any alternative paths or provide you with any sort of significant differences in how you're playing the game. It's not going to turn into a case where you can like side with March over Dan Hang in any kind of meaningful way.
Yeah, we're not going to choose to destroy the ashes of Andraste and then suddenly have to murder March. Like that's not
Yeah.
a thing that's going to happen in this one. But like I the problem with that is they can show that difference of opinion in like one scene, but ultimately what it always comes down to when making a decision is, well, what do you want to do, Trailblazer? I trust you.
Yeah, I mean, it is a gotcha game at the end of the day. It's still
Yeah.
limited by those factors. It can't go off in wildly different directions, but the fluff is a bit nicer.
True.
It's got nice window dressing.
They have given themselves a really interesting justification, I guess, for railroading the plot and characters a bit in the form of Elio's like screenwriting. In that we have characters who are actively telling us, hey, this is all preordained, like we know exactly what's going to happen and we're going to make it that way. So ultimately your choices don't matter, but don't worry, don't think about that.
Oh,
I mean,
right.
yeah.
I forgot about the Celeron Hunters. How did I
Yeah, we
forget
haven't
about
gotten into our favorite Team Rocket yet.
Exactly. Well, no, our favorite Team Rocket were the IPC mooks from the Pokemon event,
Right.
but the Celeron Hunters are up there.
So how do we feel about those guys?
The Celeron Hunters? They're
I mean,
interesting.
considering 3 of them have been recruitable.
They're so deeply tied into the story that they may as well just be an extension of the Express crew at this point. Like, I mean, even though they're technically our rivals and or villains, like, they're still semi-welcome on the Express when we do their character quests. As a cast, I like them because it's very obvious that they do have their, like, they're not bad guys in that they're just there to do villainy. They have their own motivations, and we've seen that play out a little bit once we've kind of learned more about those characters. Like, Silver Wolf is just kind of a, like, hedonist. She's just there for, like, the fun of gaming or whatever.
I never thought about her as a hedonist, but like if we're looking at everything she says, it's like, yeah, gamer hedonism.
Yeah, she's just a gamer hedonist. She's just there for the fun of the game.
She's just looking for that gamer dopamine hit. Messages the Trailblazer at least once to ask if they're gonna do like a gotcha poll somewhere.
God, I never thought about her as a hedonist, but it's like, yeah, that if the shoe fits, right?
Yeah. Well, and then you have Kafka, who, like, she very clearly has an agenda. We just don't know what it is yet because it's very inherently tied in with the backstory of the Trailblazer. But, like, she also, at least to a certain extent, seems to care about her teammates. Like, she's basically Blade's caretaker aboard the Xianzhou. The only question is how much of that is like, oh, does she actually care about him versus how much of this is Elio telling her she needs to take care of him because he's necessary? Because she seems to inherently trust Elio.
How do we feel about Kefka? Because I feel like Kefka says a lot of things that Kefka thinks are cool that I don't think are cool, but then Kefka will do something cool, and I'm like, yeah, that's pretty cool. You shouldn't constantly talk about all the cool things you're doing. You should just do cool things.
I think a part of it is also like, yeah, she says some kind of cringe things, but again, how much of that is just Elio's poor script writing?
Yeah, it turns out Elio's not actually good at Elio's job.
he listen, he knows what's going to happen and he knows the actions that he has to take, but in terms of writing dialogue, he's still working on that, you know?
He's a Fire Emblem player.
Wait, please explain.
Yeah, I don't even know where to begin with that.
But basically, what I'm getting at here is Elio is approaching this like a Fire Emblem player would. He's going for like the optimal outcome, or I guess more people don't die, or whatever it is that his idea of an optimal outcome is. But he's trying to move the pieces around the board in a specific way. So he's a Fire Emblem tactician.
You know what? I love that. That is so good because there's a way to tie that back into like Silver Wolf later, where it's like the only reason he keeps her around is both for her hacking, but also to get those optimal strategies on which supports you want to get up to A, and then
yes, exactly, because Silver Wolf would have all the deets and all that Fire Emblem eugenics.
I don't know if that's a good idea though, because like Silver Wolf plays a lot of games, but like she's not good at video games.
What are you talking about? She's the best at video games.
She
except
cheats.
For the Pokemon game.
She lies and cheats. She loses constantly.
No. She only cheats sometimes. She didn't cheat in the Pokemon game.
She loses in her trailer because Kafka distracts her.
That is true. But we don't know what she's playing. If she's like a COD player, that makes sense.
Oh my god.
Well, she's playing Honkai Impact 3.
Oh my god.
Oh, I know nothing about that game.
If you think about it in that sense, there's also like no as far as we're aware, there's no like interstellar global moderator who can like reach out and like ban her for cheating. So she can
Technically,
probably
the IPC acts like the Google Play Store.
No, yeah. Herta sells her out to the IPC, and they ban 42 of Silverwolf's accounts in her storyline. She can't even win in her own character storyline.
Okay, that's fair.
She still shows up to those Melee tournaments in person.
Oh no. No. No, that's where she needs the hologram for a lot of reasons.
But I do like the idea that it is like a Fire Emblem style tactician game, that we're going to see the propagation return as the baby dimension.
Oh God.
No.
No, get them out of there.
Wait a minute.
No.
I suddenly want to get off this metaphor.
That's the problem with the Stellaron Hunters. They are all tremendously cringe, but the most infuriating part is that they're competent and can actually kind of back up all of the stupid things they say with the cool things they do.
Exactly.
I've seen a lot of really horny art of one of the 3 Stellaron Hunters who are currently playable. I'm sure there are more for the other 2.
That's a real dice roll right there.
It is a real dice roll, because honestly, I'm pretty sure there's something for all of them out there.
How about Sam the Robot? When is Sam the Robot showing up?
Not for a while. There might be more to Sam. But yeah, overall, Stellaron Hunters, cringe in word, cool in action. We'll see where they go.
So Himiko hasn't actually gotten a whole lot to do yet. She kind of was the person who repaired the Express after it had fallen into disarray at some point in the past, and it's kind of like collective team mom. She mostly just gave Bronya a pep talk at the end of the second to most recent main quest. But yeah, it seems like she might have more stuff to do on Paniconi, given that that was kind of the destination she had originally chartered in the first place before the Xianzhou business kind of interrupted that plan.
Well, and we know that she's going to be much more important in the story later on, because she is a carryover from Honkai Impact 3rd. Not in the way that Welt is, in that it's the same character, but she is representative of a character who was very close to Welt in that universe. So I don't think there's any situation where that doesn't come back at some point.
Yeah, they've been keeping Welt sort of out of the way of anybody who looked like anyone else he used to know, particularly both of the settings Bronya's, with Himeko sort of being the only exception to that.
Well, we did get a direct reference to Luocha being the character, or being representative of the character that Welt knew from Honkai Impact that he is. Like,
right, that guy.
There was a part where I don't know the character's name because I don't play Honkai Impact.
I've heard the name Auto Apocalypse.
That sounds silly, but also right. But yeah, so like, because there was a part where Welt saw video footage of Luocha and then had like a flashback into Honkai Impact, and like we saw that character in there. So we do know that he is making these connections between these characters.
They've really specifically kept him like not in any of the scenes with Bronya specifically. I think maybe because it's just going to be like he'd already have like too many flashbacks just from having 2 of them running around.
Oh god, that's right. I forgot that Silver Wolf technically counts as a Bronya. So yeah, we talked a lot about the characters that we've kind of met up to at least the beginning of the game. Like, do we want to get into the settings a little bit more? Because there's a couple of different zones here that are kind of cool in some of the things that they do.
Yeah, so Herta Space Station. I think this area was a good decision. We are constantly criticizing Mondstadt because it ends up kind of being divided between early game Mondstadt and then everything that they made after the game was launched. I feel like amongst its like early problems, it felt like it had this issue where you immediately solved a crisis and then everybody was just sort of lavishing praise on you, and the area sort of stopped feeling like a location with which anything of major consequence could happen because it was more of a tone setter than anything. So to that end, I'm happy with Star Rail's introduction of the Herta space station, because the Herta space station is an area where you're immediately thrust into a zone of crisis and resolve the issue near immediately, but the functionality of that seems to fit a little bit better because the scope of the area is a lot smaller, and it's primarily there to introduce you to the simulated universe, which will sort of act as both the game's like kind of ongoing parallel game arcadey mode, but also the post game. Additionally, the amount of characters who are actually playable on the space station are really just limited to Herta, Asta, and Arlen.
They also, kind of by the nature of the Herta space station just being like Herta's weird artifact like storehouse, they set it up as a good location to just have like events in. Like if they want to have an event where you go into the video game and then you do a thing, or you have an event where it's like they want to test like weird combat capabilities, they have an in-universe justification for that now, because they can just say, oh yeah, hey, there's this weird artifact from the storehouse that we're like running tests on or that escaped, and like now you got to go deal with it.
Yeah.
And so that really gives them a lot of freedom.
I do like the framework that they've put in place for some of that, like anything related to the simulated universe as far as like events go. It's like Herta and company saying, oh yeah, by the way, we released a patch, there's more stuff, we need you to debug it for us.
The simulated universe is Herta's invention. It's supposed to be a device meant for interacting with the settings aeons so that they can be properly studied. Functionally, it's a giant video game, and even though Herta herself will say that it's not, that is exactly what it is. It's a roguelike of the Trailblazers' memories, and that means that they don't need to develop any new assets for it, which is very mercenary and a good idea.
And it is interesting that like the in-universe discussion around it is like Herta very much views it as the way EVE Online's developers kind of view their game, as like an opportunity to study human nature as it interacts with this strange economy that's completely player-run, and then meanwhile you have Scroll, who's like, oh no, this is WoW, like here's a DLC.
Pretty sure she started it like saying, yeah, so we've made the universe like 1-to-1, so that means that anything an Aeon would say to you in that setting would also apply to an Aeon IRL, so this doubles as research on the Aeons. Mm-hmm. Which is buck wild.
We built a video game to talk to God.
And hey, I mean, like, you may get incinerated by Nanook immediately, but we get to hang out with our boy, Aha, my favorite Aeon.
God.
I love Aha. Aha's the best.
Aha's fun. You would definitely be a masked fool.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I mean,
look at us. Yeah.
Look at us, bro. Look at us.
We're all wearing masks here. What are you talking about?
Listen, I'm a masked fool, but I'm not a masked fool, TM.
Unfortunately, the masked fools can range from, our boy Giovanni to the local convention's Deadpool cosplayers. So it's a real Russian roulette on where you land with that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, simulated universe. What the fuck, Hoyoverse? Give it to us. And I mean, give it to us in Genshin. This is egregious. Why did you put it in a different game? I look at it and I'm like,
for Shiki Taisho's Shank Shack.
Yeah, give us the Shiki Taisho Shank Shack. Like, it was supposed to no, give it back. It was ours, damn it.
We had it first.
You're as beautiful as the day I lost you, which was October 2021.
Oh god, is it really been that long?
Yeah.
Time sure flies.
It has been that long. Simulated Universe is the game's roguelike section. It is a very well done roguelike. It is very engaging. It's kind of pulling from the newer school of roguelikes by having kind of a Hades boon system. You get to pick what your power-ups are, you get to make your builds, refight old bosses, and even get rewarded exclusive artifacts. same sort of artifacts that are in Genshin, because in Star Rail there are 6 artifact slots, 2 of which you can only earn from Simulated Universe. This is, in its own way, quite horrible, but it acts as a great in-game reward, so I'm a little bit torn on it, especially because it doesn't demand you level up the artifacts as much as you would in Genshin. You just have to farm more of them. But Simulated Universe is really good. So I want to play it. And I'd rather play Simulated Universe than just farm a random domain. I'm real torn up about this whole thing because damn it, they should have put it in the other game. Why isn't it in the other game? They already made it in the other game.
And it has not come back. Not once. Ugh,
yeah, Taisho's just gone on vacation forever. She's just like, bye lads. Thanks for the good times. See ya.
It's interesting too because there was something in the recent 4.2 Genshin special program where they went out of their way to talk about how they're going to try to make the mushroom minigame permanent, but they don't feel like they're ready, which is frankly the most transparent Hoyoverse has ever been about this kind of thing. Like, it's one of the few times they've kind of like pulled back the curtain and said, hey, we have this gameplay mode we're interested in pursuing, but we don't feel like it's scalable at the moment. We don't have like the right decisions to make it a kind of long-term gameplay mode, right? So they're definitely willing to go so far as talking about event exclusive mini games they think can make it back to Genshin. And of course, Shiki Taisha was not at all mentioned, even though I'm positive that there are loads of players who are saying, hey, bring this back as a permanent gameplay mode. So, I don't know, maybe not because of like the constant warfare, but like,
but they made it its own separate game mode in Star Rail. Like, there has to be a demand for it, even from the developers.
Well, yeah, and in Star Rail too, the other thing to note is that they've also continued to iterate on it. Not only have they had event exclusive Simulated Universe subworlds that have shown up, but they even introduced like the Swarm Disaster, which kind of functions as a side mode to it. And just the other day, World 8 finally came out. So they're going to continue on with the regular Simulated Universe as well. Like, there's a permanent variation of Simulated Universe in the Swarm Disaster that's in the game, and they're continuing on with the main line of it as well. It's a big mode for the game. And, you know, part of this is also because, again, Star Rail is actually a much smaller game. They don't have the benefit of just constantly adding new world exploration to sort of function as like the carrot that the player base is constantly chasing. But it acts as such a better kind of end game / like method with which to test your characters and builds, especially under different, you know, positive or negative circumstances, that I'm like, man, I am jealous of it. And I'm playing the game. I'm jealous that it's in this game.
Well, it also acts as like a really good lore drop for the overall universe in Star Rail too, because like anytime we go to a planet, most of the lore we're going to get is just about the history of that planet. But because Simulated Universe acts as a perfect simulation of the whole universe, they can do things like the Swarm Disaster, which was a real historical event in the Star Rail universe that covered not just one planet, but like whole sections of space. So they can go back and be like, hey, there was this historical period that we want the players to know about and to play around with, that we don't have to like figure out how to tie into a specific world. We can just throw it in here, and now it's a new side mode, or now it's a new world that the Trailblazer can interact with while they're playing.
Yeah. Taziroth was introduced to the game long dead, but then the Swarm Disaster happened, and it was like, here's just an entire exploration of this one Aeon that doesn't even exist anymore.
And they make the weekly rewards. You only have to do Simulated Universe once a week if you want to get like all the rewards you want. One of them is basically Star Rail's equivalent of like a talent crown. Which, like, could you imagine if they put that in Genshin? We just got Shiki Taisho's Murder Mansion with, like, a crown at the end every week.
Just every week? Just casually?
Every week.
You could triple crown everybody you ever wanted.
God.
Like, I have currently in my possession 6 5-star Star Rail characters that have their talents maxed.
Yeah,
it is not hard.
Yeah.
And it's fun. It's a really fun mode.
sorry, the mention of Tazeroth being long dead already, rather, when Swarm Disaster was introduced, sort of reminds me that we are technically, the Nameless and the Trailblazer are technically operating on the auspices of also a dead Aeon, or at least a vanished Aeon, since Akivili is also missing.
I think Akivili is
Yes.
actually the Genshin Traveler. Just gonna throw that out there.
I mean, yeah, there's lots of theories
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
Akivili is gone, but yeah, like, Akivili's been missing in action for a while.
And understand, I absolutely, under no circumstance whatsoever, ever want Star Rail to touch the lore of Genshin or vice versa. But the only exception to that is Akivili being the Traveler's plural, maybe, makes so much sense that it's like, hey, the absence of this, Aeon in the setting is like prompting everybody else to drive forward and, do the space exploration. And it actually makes the Traveler make sense because it's like, yeah, they're constantly traveling. They were traveling when they got jumped at the start of Genshin. Akivili's lore states that Akivili was traveling around before, quote, an accident. I'm like, it kind of fits way too well. And I know there are already theories about this on YouTube, so this isn't exactly a novel opinion, but I hope that is the only narrative connective tissue between the two games. All right.
Belabog, the first world that is much like Genshin's last country, Xianzhou.
Yeah. Big, frozen, sort of Russian-looking city. My impression about Belabog is that we got this because we're still a couple of years away from Xianzhou.
Oh, for sure. But I'm sure in the way that like Genshin has kind of pollinated into Star Rail, I'm wondering how much of the assets and design they're putting into Belabog and Star Rail is going to end up back in Genshin. I will say, first impression of Belabog as like, oh hey, let's let the kids go adventure for a little bit was kind of fun, because even though we had a chance to kind of get to know some of these characters in Herta Space Station, to have an extended storyline with like March and Danheng down on the planet, we kind of get to learn a little bit more how the Trailblazers operate. We got to learn a little bit more about just their dynamic between these characters. And it was also a very strong start because, as I've talked about in previous episodes, there aren't really like straight ships that I'm super invested in Genshin, but Star Rail convinced both Beefy and I, when we were talking about this off pod, that like, oh yeah, Welt and Himiko are absolutely fucking while the kids are down on the planet. Like they sent them away because they don't get time alone.
God.
And nothing that was said later on contradicted that point. Anything to get the kids out of the house, let them have some alone time and just do whatever. But like, it did also set up later on just kind of how powerful Himiko is with the fucking orbital laser.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So I got a question for you guys. Did you sort of understand the overarching themes of Belabog? Because I think that the story kind of caught up to that near the end. When I get into these games, it takes a long time to really figure out what terminology and ideas are important. And it almost takes like a rewatch for me to sort of like really wrap my head around, particularly the early parts of the game. Belabog's like really big on this notion of the preservation and preserving against both the fragmentum, using the eternal freeze, the architects, the giant robots, all of this stuff. It kind of got like a little bit crunched in my head because I was sort of focusing more on the very imminent setup from the Silvermane guards, where characters drop down to the planet, say they're going to deal with the Stellaron. Cocolia, the head guardian, is like, right, yeah. No, I believe you guys. Go stay in this hotel, and then immediately tries to get everyone arrested the following day. Like, I kind of lost the forest for the trees on that a little bit.
My impression of Belabog is that its overarching story was it fell into a pattern of perseverance above all else, and like trying to hold on to the small amount of like life that was left on the planet that it ended up making that life miserable. It did not care about the quality of the life so long as the life existed. And so that was kind of the darker side of the preservation, where it was like, hold on to what we have no matter what, even if that stunts its growth.
The status quo must remain, because even if it sucks, like it exists.
Yeah.
It's better the devil you know, etc.
Yeah. So and that's part of that came from the influence of the Stellaron into Cocolia, and we really saw that playing out in the underworld with the society there and how it was just completely abandoned.
Yeah, because the underworld sucks, and I mean it's meant to suck. It's very clear, why it sucks.
They were contrasted with the overworld though, where like, yeah, they were all about, also persevering and fighting against the fragmentum and not dying underground, but the characters there made the effort to try to make life better for each other. Like Natasha's whole thing is like running the orphanage to like give these kids a chance at a normal life, running the clinic to like keep people's health up and like not just act as triage but as like preventative care. You had Hook's father who, worked so hard to like use his geomarrow detector to like make money so that he could buy nice things for Hook. Like there was an effort being made there to not only preserve but to thrive. Whereas the overworld's whole thing was just preservation.
That makes sense.
I did hear a lot of Midgard jokes around when people started playing Belabog, I guess, and got down to like
they're shaped the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But also like, I mean, wildfire, avalanche, etc.
I didn't even think about that, but yeah. God, yeah, that didn't initially click for me.
Look, we know Hoyo plays other games, and we know they like taking those other games into their games. So
yeah, yeah.
I mean, like the thing is, it's a weird case where, personally, I felt like the story and interpersonal conflicts made complete sense when I played through it the first time, but as soon as it got into the overarching themes, I felt like I had seriously missed the story's message. During the Cocolia fight, the song Wildfire has the drop in it. That's one of the hypest moments of the game. It was almost there as like as a statement to be like, hey, you know how in Genshin your traveler can change elements walking up to a statue? It's like, well, we're gonna do these as these really bombastic mid-battle cutscenes where you make contact with the preservation and then get the big amber lance to go fight against the literal embodiment of stagnation. But I will say it did catch me a little bit off guard, just because it was like, oh man, was I supposed to be paying more attention to the whole like preservation aspect of this? And the answer was yes. It got a little bit lost on me.
Right. Well, that's the thing though that I think if you're coming from Genshin into this, you kind of have to keep in mind is that in Genshin they baby you a lot in the larger explanations and dialogue of quest lines, where they will just like repeat the same points over and over again to make sure that you're paying attention, because they also recognize that like, hey, there could just be a long time between when you did the last story quest and when you did this one, because there's all this region to explore in between the two, or you might be building a character. Like there's a lot of other side activities to be doing in Genshin involved with like exploration and grinding, whereas with Honkai you don't have that exploration aspect that's going to be taking your attention away from the story. So what I found more often than not is that it's easier to go through complete quest lines in Honkai kind of just all at once.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so they don't need to baby you that much, and so they're able to get way more anime with it.
And boy, do they get anime.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Belabog was a good area. I'm going back to like how I was saying that being introduced to the Herta space station in Crisis was a good idea, is because Belabog had a little bit more room to breathe with how it was introduced and everything. It wasn't just go deal with big monster. Okay, now you're inducted into one of the highest levels of government on our planet. It's like there's a lot more conflict and brushing up against each other before then. I mean, especially too because being that this is a turn-based game, you don't have to worry about matching character animations to an NPC version of them. Genshin has a couple of boss fights that are playable characters. Star Rail has a lot. Japard, Branya, Kafka, Yangqing. There's a lot of playable characters you just go up against, because it's a lot easier to just do that in this format. Which means that, hey, characters don't all need to sort of have this like undercurrent of righteousness to all of them. I mean, they still do anyway, but maybe not Kafka. But you can have conflict with characters narratively, and that's better for the game's writing as well, or at least it gives them more flexibility on it.
Yeah, that is something that I wish we had a little bit more in Genshin. Was like every character that's playable has to be like a good person or misunderstood or like positively like portrayed in a way. Whereas Honkai, it's okay to have these more morally gray characters. It's okay to have characters that you are in direct opposition to, but like will ultimately still have an understanding with. Like I wish we had more of that dynamic in Genshin because it just feels like kind of, I don't know, a little boring at times.
Well, it's just that it's easy to recognize what their strings are. Like, there's a limitation. There are certain rules that characters have that can never really be broken for the sake of there being a narrative. And the other thing is that also Genshin has to really telegraph what its bosses are going to be. You'll know well in advance that you're going to be fighting something because you probably saw it at least 45 minutes earlier, if not longer. Here, it feels like there's a few more surprises they have up their sleeves just because it's easier to conceal certain story details because they have more room to focus on the story. They're not actually being kneecapped by their mechanics.
They're definitely a lot more complex in Genshin just because of the open world aspect of it. Whereas with turn based, the abilities are largely just how do these impact our turn based combat.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, ultimately, Belabog, I thought it was a fine story. I thought it was another good way to kind of start out how we interact with the world. The story at times did feel like it was kind of lagging on a little bit, especially when it came to like the Clara sections. Like I love her as a character, but I don't think we needed to spend as much time with her as we ended up doing in the story. I enjoyed both of the events that we had in Belabog so far, like the museum event and the Pokemon event. I thought those were really fun ways of fleshing out the setting a little bit more. Like with the museum event, we got to learn a little bit more about the history of Belabog and like make changes to the setting that were permanent. Like we got to rebuild this museum that we can still go and visit even after the event, and like I like that aspect of it, of being able to take these sections of map that are kind of bare bones and then help them develop a little bit. We got a similar one with the Xianzhou, which I really enjoyed, and I thought they've done a good job of implementing those so far. And then the Pokemon event was just very obviously they wanted to make a Pokemon game, and
Oh, yeah.
this was their solution to that.
They've been champing at the bits for a Pokemon game for a while. Like both, like the mushroom events in Genshin, and then Ethereum Wars. Like Ethereum Wars, lengthwise, is about half the length of a regular old school Game Boy Pokemon game. Like those games you can get through relatively quickly. Ethereum Wars took me like 15 hours to beat. It was intricate. It was really intricate, and it was difficult.
Yeah, I mean we had like 4 gyms that we basically had to get through, and then we had an Elite Four fight, and then kind of 2 Grand Champion fights.
Yeah, it was a lot.
And then the secret red fight at the end.
Yeah.
In grand old Pokemon game tradition.
Mm-hmm. It was a good time though. I like when they find ways to change up the gameplay like this. I think that does a good. I think it does a lot for the game to not leave it stagnating with just the typical turn-based combat.
Actually, I also like the fact that the game does not say that you single-handedly solved the entire planet's problems by dealing with Cocolia.
Mm-hmm.
The most that they kind of got for the setting was, okay, the eternal freeze isn't happening anymore and the planet is going to, slightly warm up from here, but it's still an uphill struggle for survival. The planet is still desperately poor. And then the immediate next conflict is, hey, we owe the IRS our back taxes. And it just turns into this whole like clusterfuck of, do we want to sell the planet to it like an interastral trading corporation or not? And it's actually like a really interesting conflict because you also have to go around getting like literally polling random people on the street being like, hey, do you want us to be able to retain our independence, or would you sell the planet off in favor of joining like a larger a larger space corporation that can kind of help us get back on our feet a little bit faster, because things have been bad, so any outside help might actually be a good thing. Like, it was a real moral conflict, like, you know.
With the caveat that, like, if you sell the planet to the Interstellar Corporation, you are basically going to be in wage slavery for the rest of your life, and so are your kids, etc.
But they did a decent enough job of like contrasting those 2 points. Like, it was
Yeah.
never like a, oh, this is the evil space corporation coming in and
Yeah,
trying to take over the planet.
there was no, like, obviously good the superior answer, because, like, both sides had some, like, pros and cons, like, that were pretty hefty.
Mhm.
So it's just like, okay, well, I mean, this is a big decision, kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. So what's your take on it, buddy?
Yeah, I really like that, and again, we're gonna keep comparing it to Genshin because that's our main game we play. But like, I like that take of like, oh, the problems aren't solved. We do still have things we're having to deal with here. Like, could you imagine if after we took care of Storm Terror and Mondstadt, like we came back and they're like, hey, so we're having a problem with the government because the Knights of Favonius are basically a military police state. What do we do?
Yeah.
Like, that
I
would
mean,
actually be an interesting problem to have to deal with.
yes, I think. Um, to be fair, Belabog was kind of building up to that point, because, like, even with the museum event, the like, a lot of it was, like, we were learning the history of the Belabog that we hadn't previously known, and all that. But also, a lot of it was like, yeah, like, this is stuff that we're digging back up that some of these people didn't even know about, because they've been so busy trying to survive that they didn't really care about, like, things like cultural heritage or whatever. Because what is that? Like, you can't eat that. You can't use it to stay warm.
Yeah, it's like we are fighting for our lives out here, so some people on the planet are just, look, we're kind of in, a horrible wage slavery anyway, so what's it if, we get a few more benefits out of it? It is a really fascinating, conflict. Topaz trying to manipulate Branya with a sob story.
Well, it wasn't necessarily manipulation. Like,
I
she
mean,
was being earnest.
She was being
yes.
earnest, but I think she was being earnest in the sense that she was also, that was a very calculated move, but then it also got turned back on her because it was like, oh, if you're willing to resort to a sob story, then it means we can actually appeal to your emotions. So look at this big robot we built. See, we can be independent. It's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah. The conflict did ultimately boil down to, if Topaz personally thinks you can survive without the IPC's help, then you can keep your independence, I guess. Topaz drank so much of the IPC's Kool-Aid, her hair color changed. She earnestly believed what she was saying.
Yeah.
And the conflict did boil down to, if we can convince her that we don't actually need the IPC's help, everything will be fine. And it ultimately was. Belabog is not sold off, so it still had like a little bit of a nice bow they could put on that particular angle of the plot line. But it was still an interesting ride up until that point.
Yeah. It I mean, that's the thing. They're doing a good job of revisiting problems that are like not completely solved. So we're still kind of like, we didn't completely resolve the debt crisis either, because Topaz is going to see the blowback now for not properly collecting, and the IPC is also from the preservation and known to persevere. So who knows if this flares up again?
Yeah. They put a bow on that angle of the storyline. It may not be completely over. They were at a point where they were like, okay, we do need to wrap this part of it up. Yeah, it could come back up later, and I'm excited to see if it does go anywhere. Xianzhou.
Yeah, so that was a really interesting setting.
Space leeway.
Yeah, Space
Space
Leeway.
Leeway.
The Chinese heaven-inspired region, similar to Leeway, was the second region we went to, although this did have a completely different vibe to it. Leeway is heavily colored by nostalgia. If I had to give it a baseline emotion I associate with it, Leeway is, in a sense, all about nostalgia, moving past nostalgia, what parts of culture to retain, what parts of it can be modernized. It's a constant theme with
It's
Leeway.
kind of like a romantic, like, sort of not quite pastoralist, but like, it's
Maybe more like traditionalist.
Yeah. It's like like romantic traditionalist kind of like presentation of Chinese aesthetics and other things wrapped up into a commerce hub.
The Xianzhou is heavily militarized, given that they're waging a ongoing war with the Abundance, and they're basically also constantly on the move. The entire Xianzhou is a planet-sized ship, and that really changes the entire vibe of it. You know, the aesthetics are slightly similar, but this place is like feels a lot more like a Star Trek, maybe
Come to
slightly
think of it,
Romulan.
isn't it the proper title is the Xianzhou Alliance, isn't it? So like
Yeah,
it's a fleet of ships.
The Luofu is the specific ship we are on. The Xianzhou Alliance is the name of the fleet of ships.
Yes.
So like there's more than one of these things.
Oh yeah, and we've heard them referenced.
Yeah.
Like we know that there are other ships that are in this. It's just the only one that we're really ever able to board or interact with is the Luofu.
Since that's where the nameless end up but by means of hook or crook or so we got this we've caught the Stellaron Hunter and they're insisting that you have to be involved somehow.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
the trick it really boils down to is Elio is basically running interference where he knows that there is going to be a Stellaron that spawns or that appears on the ship. And so he sort of like uses Kafka to route everybody to the Xianzhou to sort of put them in place to deal with like the incoming crisis with that. I don't have a whole lot to say on the actual story of this location. The critique online I've seen people say is that the Xianzhou has a lot of world building and it doesn't necessarily have a lot of story. It seems like Hoyo has a general idea of how they want to continue using the Xianzhou Luofu in the future. Especially because even in the scope of Genshin, there is a slight bias towards Liyue, and I feel like the Xianzhou Luofu is going to be a similar situation to that. If only because of the sort of like cultural
game.
Yeah, the cultural ambassadorship angle that Hoyo has kind of found themselves in at this point. So
the impression I've gotten is that like any of the regions or zones that they create that are based on China, such as Liyue or the Xianzhou, they put a heavy emphasis on authenticity in a way that they can like draw in players from their home country and that they can really like show their love for like the culture that they're trying to display. But oftentimes that leads to much more long-winded or kind of poorly paced sections for outside players who were not able to appreciate any references that are being made or were not able to understand kind of maybe the cultural things that they're trying to reference. And so to us, it just feels like it's a lot of world building that doesn't really lead anywhere until it does.
And I mean, I enjoyed my time there, I should say. I thought that it was interesting. I was drawn in by the world building. I thought it was interesting. I liked the dynamics between the Xianzhou citizens, the Foxians, and the Vidyahara, and how they all sort of interact with each other and how they're all immortal, but in a different aspect to one another and sort of their inner dynamics. So, how about that Tingyun?
I mean, she sure is dead, maybe? Question mark?
I mean, I'm pretty sure she's dead, as in like they fucking like we did a whole funeral for her and everything.
They gave themselves a backdoor. They will bring her back whenever they feel like they can or need to. They wouldn't have been so vague about it even with the funeral. It might be a couple of years, but this is really the thing I wanted to get into with like the plot line, because like they straight up killed a playable character. Like she was evil from the start. She did not like you. She only pretended to like you. She was evil. She snapped her own neck in front of everybody, and then she fought you as a 70-foot tall woman. Damn, you know.
And all I have to say on that is, Hoyo, where the fuck is Rosie? Give us Rosie. If you're going to kill a playable character and then still let them be playable, give us Rosie. Come on. We've been begging for this.
Give her back. She was ours, damn it.
She was ours, damn it.
I see the, what was it, the local Genshin lament is, give it back, it was ours.
Exactly. Come on, she should have been playable. Everyone wanted it. Bring us Senora.
But yeah, they like, the thing is, okay, so far, Honkai Impact 3rd, they killed the original Himeko. I don't know who else possibly died across all of their other games. I'm sure there was at least one other I don't know about somewhere in Honkai Impact Third. Genshin, everybody's alive. The game is incredibly idyllic. Honkai, damn, that was a statement. And immediately, like clockwork, I saw the video essay crop up, like how upset this one guy was that Tingyun died, and I'm like, no. This is the memorable part of it. This is the part where they took a risk. They don't take this kind of risk
Yeah.
normally. This is a
Yeah,
good
do
thing.
not punish them for this, please.
She's not even really dead because they gave themselves that back door. Like it's a Schrodinger's Tingyun. She's dead for now, but they literally
Yeah,
Okay,
okay.
so
I guess
they will bring her back. They literally said in the text of the game they will bring her back whenever they feel like it.
Okay, so I will say I did see something pointed out in the most recent Halloween event that apparently there's a line about possession where it often ends fatally. So people are reading that as also applying to Tingyun, where if she was just possessed by the Ravager, it like she may actually be dead if when she was released from it.
If I'm not seeing her ghost in that event, I'm like she's still alive for real. And this isn't copium. I
That's
actually don't
true.
care about Tingyun at all. I don't have very strong feelings on the character. It's just the statement from the meta narrative perspective.
But that's the thing. I would love to see more characters that just get killed off but are still playable. And like we don't need an explanation for it. It's understood that this is like the traveler or the trailblazer with like their party of friends that they're bringing along. And if someone dies, sure, like I don't know. I don't feel like there needs to be an in-universe explanation for why this person is still in your party, traveling with you and doing these things. Like we can all
we
we all
have
have the
2
understanding.
Dunhungs. It at this point, like anything goes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so
because
they shouldn't be afraid to kill these characters and give stakes to the story.
it's interesting that
Yeah.
this entire genre, the entire gacha genre, is entirely contingent on non-canon party members. Like these people are in the scope of the narrative, not actually with you at that exact moment that story thing happens. It's just the characters who are there in the cutscene. But they still kind of went out of their way, specifically in Genshin itself, to just sort of always have voice lines or like a reasoning behind why a character's traveling with you. Like again, I think it's great that Child says, "Hey, I'm actually not going to use 100% of my power. I'm going to practice using this bow, and that's why you're not going to see me turn into my boss form because I'm literally not trying." You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, like they still went out of their way to give a reason for why he would join up with you in that game. And this one, it's just like, okay, Tingyun is here, Tingyun is with you in the cutscenes, and then she's an evil space alien, and you fight her, and then she's dead, just sort of dead, right? Yeah. It was using a character who they invested time and resources and money into to pull over a plot twist on you. And granted, maybe not the best of plot twists. Maybe not super good. Actually, it wasn't actually like that impactful of a betrayal. It was almost unmotivated, other than her being an evil space alien. But it was a statement. It was them saying, "We're willing to actually have narrative stakes involved with playable characters. This is us kind of testing the waters a little bit. We're going to see how many 20-minute video essays people write about this." But it was a first in a long time for them.
Yeah, I hope that the more video essays that show up, that motivates them more to do it. Because, like, I like that this is the game where they're taking those narrative risks. I like that we're seeing, like, these differences where, like, there are stakes to the story, it feels like. And I hope that continues and that we keep seeing that. Because one of the things that we've kind of said a couple times or, like, referenced is just, like, the writing in Honkai is much better than it is in Genshin. Like, it has to be, because that is the main draw of this game. It's not going to be unique gameplay experiences, because it's a turn-based RPG. You played one, you played most of them. Like, the narrative and the characters have to be the selling point for this more than anything else. And I think that they've been really knocking it out of the park when it comes to that. Like, during Tingyun's funeral, and during the funeral that they have as a part of, What's-Her-Face's character quest, the other Foxian lady, the pilot.
Yukong?
Yeah, Yukong. Like, they did a good job of writing that where you could feel like there was actual loss here. Like, Yukong's... And the voice acting is also up to, you know, up to the standard that Hoyo has set for their voice acting. Like, I primarily play the Honkai with the English dub playing over and the English voice actors, and they have all been consistently knocking it out of the park.
Yeah.
Also, the text conversations that you have, like, with your party members, where they'll just text you at the beginning of the day and you can have little, like, that is just such good writing to characterize these people. Like, again, the Welt conversation where he's asking you how to change his avatar so you can have a cool mech drawing that he had, or Gwenifin calling you fam because she's supposed to be like a little influencer streamer. Like, it's so fun.
Yeah. That's a really nice touch. And also it's like fan service too, because because like here's one of the characters you rolled like texting you to like chat with you or whatever. And
Yeah.
like sure you're you have like a you pick between like a bunch of like what was it, like predetermined responses, but like you do get to pick them generally, and it's pretty funny.
Yeah, like they're short conversations that have absolutely no impact on the world, but are just there to like flesh out these characters and your relationship with them a little bit more. And I think that that's such a good idea.
All right, so the gameplay of Honkai Star Rail is turn-based. The game will even play itself for you if you are to turn on auto battle. Additionally, they also allow for you to borrow other players' characters in a kind of more standardized asynchronous
Like
multiplayer system that is common
friend
to a lot of other
characters.
gacha games. So that's cool.
Yeah.
That's neat. I like
This
doing that.
causes some very funny incidents when it comes to like somebody pulling a character that a bunch of the people in the friend group want. It's like I think when I pulled Blade, like my entire 14 raid crew that also played Star Rail was like, our Blade is home.
Our Blade. Dun, 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 dun.
In addition to all of the characters having a set path, they also have one of the 7 elements, although this is a little bit different from Genshin's 7 elements. They were dropping the dedicated Hydro, Dendro, and Geo in favor of replacing those with Physical, Quantum, and Imaginary. I have no idea what Quantum is other than being like darkness and black holes and space singularities. Not that we haven't seen a little bit of that in Genshin recently. Imaginary is like gold light energy, but also occasionally funneled through a kind of Dendro looking attack or a kind of Hydro looking attack, or also black holes. So
or dropping marble busts on bad guys.
Or dropping marble busts. Wait, who does that?
Dr. Ratio.
Ratio.
Ah, Dr. Ratio.
He's just the L plus ratio guy.
It's so funny.
Yeah, but characters have a standard attack, characters have a skill attack, and characters have a burst attack or an ultimate. In addition to that, there are a whole plethora of passive mechanics that make a character be built the way that they are. The entire group shares a MP bar, which is really just sort of 5 ticks of skill usage. Yeah, all pretty straightforward. There's energy regeneration, speed mechanics. There's really not a whole lot to say in terms of what sort of individual options you have on a combat screen. It's the game's main focus really shines when it comes to the actual aspect of character building and kind of turning your team into a well-oiled machine to overcome challenges.
Yeah, like the paths will often highlight kind of what role a character fills in a team, but often the way that role is handled is just, determined by the individual character. Like, you have Topaz, who is fire element and the hunt path, which means she's a single target attacker, but she primarily fights through follow-up attacks, where she will mark an enemy, and then at a later point, her little companion Numby will attack the enemy. So it's just the different kind of flavors or ways they can integrate those mechanics together.
And it's also worth noting that not all paths that are present in the story have a gameplay representation on player characters. For example, in Simulated Universe, follow-ups are typically associated with the with Aha the Elation, but player classes aren't actually covered by Aha. That's really mostly mechanics that are limited to Simulated Universe. So in a world where passive attacks were sort of more emphasized, Topaz might be an Elation character, but given that that would be just a little bit too dumb and complicated, she's sort of under the hunt path because of like her single target functionality.
I think also like previously follow-up attacks were kind of the realm of erudition characters, but now they've sort of like branched out to other uh character classes, so that's been an interesting development, I guess.
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be like there aren't mechanics tied to specific paths outside of the playable paths. Like they try to do that with Simulated Universe a little bit, where like the boons that you get will affect a certain gameplay style, but those aren't reflective of the characters that you are playing with.
Yeah, like Fully the
Yeah.
Remembrance always has boons that are associated with freezing or increasing the odds of freezing enemies, but a lot of ice-based characters can just sort of do that anyway. It's just that Fully can add that to characters that otherwise don't have that as an ability.
Yeah.
So, with that said, what is everyone's favorite path? Either playable or even in Simulated Universe, should you be able to justify it?
I'll start. My favorite is the hunt. Primarily because of Simulated Universe, I really like the crit build kind of archetype that it fulfills. Well, it's interesting. It fulfills both like a crit build, but also speed manipulation like archetype, where it's like you want to go fast and you want to hit hard. So here's the different ways in which that can happen. It's really fun because it's like, how quickly can I mow down everything? And in the instances where I can't, how can I manipulate this in a way to where I can, keep going and win? In terms of hunt characters, I just like a lot of the ones we have. Like, but I like Dan Heng. I like Topaz. I like upcoming Dr. Ratio.
That guy.
That guy. I am so looking forward to him. He looks so fun.
Yeah, he does seem pretty wild. The hunt also has all those like just go again mechanics. So
Yeah, just repeatedly attack.
get somebody who like you get a speed buffer in there, and it's just like it's my turn forever now. I think my favorite is Nihility because if you stack enough debuffs in there, you just all those numbers go off, and it's very satisfying.
I guess for my favorite, I'm going to kind of say a boring answer and just say the Destruction. It was a class that could kind of have its roles filled by the Erudition or the Preservation, but they managed to kind of do the interplay between HP loss, HP gain, tanking, and damaging, and like a kind of high risk, high reward trade off for that.
The way I've heard Destruction characters described is like they are high damage with often a big drawback associated with it. So like with Blade, you have the HP loss. With Clara, it's that her abilities aren't great for directly damaging, but her follow-up attacks are hard hitters. And then for Dan Heng, Imbiber Lune, obviously,
it's all your skill points, but he will hit really hard.
Yeah, the Dilf eats your skill points. It's awful.
Yeah.
I do kind of like that the party composition is sort of in this little balance between, do I have enough sustain, enough firepower, and also how is my skill point economy? Because if everyone's eating your skill points for lunch, you're not going to get very far in a couple turns when you've run totally dry. But like if you've got somebody in there whose main thing is auto, then it's like, okay, so I have somebody who's generating points and people are using them.
But it is interesting the way that they put characters in. Sometimes it's very clear that they're meant to synergize well together. Like Lucha and Blade were obviously built to go together. So okay, we've kind of covered favorite paths, but who are your favorite individual characters?
Topaz. Full stop.
Yeah. I think we all knew that.
I do really like DHL's design. That ticks a lot of boxes.
He's got that Baja
he's
blast.
Very good. Yeah.
He's got that Baja blast.
That's what it is, right?
Yeah, no, you're not wrong.
The Operation Soda Steel Dragon.
Oh God.
Well, hang on. We're not there yet on Operation Soda Steel. That's for next episode.
Fucking grief.
Excellent.
Yeah, I do like DHL's design a lot, and it doesn't hurt that they definitely released some interesting animation of his light
Light
cone.
cone.
Yeah, and I'm just like, I don't know who this is for, but thanks.
They knew what they were doing. They knew what they were doing.
No, they did know. They did know.
Millions of dollars worth of market research to know exactly what they're doing. Look, Dan Heng at the end of the day is like the platonic ideal of the cross section between Zhongli, Zhao, and now Neuvillette, all as like this like Venn diagram that lands in the middle of all of them, and as a permanent character. Like the fact that they said, "Hey, this guy is in your party forever," tells me that they were so confident that they were like, "We cracked the code,"
and they did.
Yeah. He's very good too. Jesus.
He broke the meta for a little bit. Like, he was just too powerful.
It was nuts. Like just seeing him in the character trial. I wasn't planning on rolling for him. I had one fight with him in the character trial, and I was like, "Oh, I'd be stupid not to roll for this character."
Mm-hmm.
Everyone getting blasted.
Well, my favorite is Luca because he's like Link if he was a fight happy himbo. I guess he already is a fight happy himbo. Never mind, he's like Link. So there you go. He's like, Link with a robot arm.
Link if Link boxed.
He's Link if Link boxed with a robot arm. If he was in Megalobox, which I think is just a great archetype, and also with the introduction of Risley and Genshin, they found my type finally. So I guess we're just there now. So who was each of yours like first 5-star that you rolled?
So I accidentally joined on the EU server for whatever reason when I initially booted the game up. I lost about 5 days, but every time I started the new game, I got Clara like twice in a row.
That's hilarious.
It's a sign, apparently.
And of course, I was like, Clara, why do I like Clara? And then Clara got hit one time, and I was like, Svarog. Okay.
It was a sign because Svarog.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah. My first 5-star was Yanqing. He's a little outclassed now, but he was fun. Like when I didn't have better options. I think I might still build him because I do need a nice DPS character.
He is a little outclassed, but you can build him in a way that still makes him pretty functional.
Yeah. It's not like he's useless. He's definitely got uses. I just need to figure out where to fit him in because he tends to eat my skill points a little bit.
Yeah, that too. Yeah, mine was Japard, which was great because it was just an immediate upgrade from March 7th.
Yeah.
Yeah, Japard is really good, especially when you need like that. You need the shield capacity like early on.
Yeah, is he the only standard banner character that's still top tier?
I have no idea.
No, Bronya.
Yeah,
Bronya. Yeah, that makes
being
sense.
able to control turn orders is always going
to be Bronya is like the premier buffer too, with the whole turn order thing.
Yeah, she's fucking insane. I have really enjoyed the character so far. I think there haven't been very many that have like made me groan or hate them compared to like a couple in Genshin. But like I think they're doing a good job with the character writing. They're doing a good job with the character concepts. I think so far Honkai is a much more competently written game, I'll say, than Genshin.
Yeah, I still have like a couple of criticisms on. It seems like they didn't put as much effort in polishing the presentation on consoles for whatever reason. Not that they ever really needed to, but it's noticeable where it still looks like I'm looking at a phone screen even on my TV. So that was a little bit of a weird one, especially also because it wasn't a multi-platform launch, meaning that all of the banners. My understanding is that all of the banners are now going to be offset, where banners that were available 6 months ago are now just going to be on like a secondary rotation with the new banners, just to make sure that everybody could kind of like get all characters.
Get caught up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
thought you were going to describe it as like the FGO and FGO Japan thing, where like
Oh
you
yeah,
now know what's going to happen 2 years in advance.
That term is called Clairvoyance EX, and one of these days I'd really like to talk about that on the show, but maybe not today.
I have to say, it is a lot more playable on mobile than Genshin is, because I don't have to platform. Kind of sucks getting like navigating around with a tiny screen, but it's a lot more tolerable in Star Rail for me anyway, because at least I don't have to worry about jumping or falling off anything or following or having to do any kind of platforming. I can just walk around and or run, and or just fast travel to anything I need to like grind for whatever reason, which is really nice.
Yeah, that is super helpful.
Is it time to get on with the troll vacation that we're supposedly here for?
Yeah, where's Pom Pom? We need our vacation juice. Don't gamble.
Don't gamble, kids.
Don't gamble, kids.
So I guess that really does it for this episode, and as we like to say here on the Astral Express, to infinity and beyond.
Now get the fuck out.